Welcome to Disruptive Capitalists, the show where purpose-driven entrepreneurs and bold investors share how they're reshaping the world by investing time and money in a way that improves lives and creates wealth. So let's get to it. Welcome everyone to another great episode of The Disruptive Capitalist, where we talk about how we change the world by using capitalism for good. My guest today is John Makarewicz, who is a managing partner at Ferris Capital Partners. And John, thank you so much for joining the show. And can you tell us about just a little bit about who you are and then your amazing exit? Your real estate exit was fantastic.
Yeah, it was a fun ride for sure. So right out of college, I got into real estate, and candidly, it was sort of like, oh, I'll just do this until I figure out what I really want to do. So just residential real estate. And, pretty quick, I was 22. I just had an aptitude for sales. And, I quickly realized that, the average real estate agent, and I don't mean to disparage a whole group of people, but, there's just, obviously a reputation there. And sometimes that reputation is earned, right? So a lot of part-timers and people that, don't take it as seriously as they probably ought to, dealing with people's largest financial asset in a lot of cases. So thankfully I had a great mentor, and it was just all about that client experience. So to fast forward a few years, I linked up with a guy named Mark Spain, really right at the start of the Great Recession. And, I really just called him because he still had billboards up around Atlanta. And I'm thinking to myself, everybody else is going bankrupt and running scared, and this guy has billboards. So he must be doing something right. Yeah. And when we joined, there was 9 of us. It was a real estate team setup where he was still going on some appointments, but he had hired a few listing agents and had one buyer agent and a few administrators. And, we were trying to navigate the Great Recession. So we started building up the buyer team, eventually embraced short sales. And through that short sale experience, that actually brought in some of the larger institutional players that started getting into that SFR, that single family rental space. And so we ended up forming a relationship with Invitation Homes, which was at the time owned by Blackstone. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny, I was kind of young. I was like in my late 20s. I didn't even know who Blackstone was. Somebody says, oh, they're one of the largest private equity. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And it was just almost like complete ignorance around that world at the time.
Like the Death Star, man.
It was unbelievable. And these guys came into town with, frankly, no plan other than we want to buy a lot of houses. And Mark Spain would tell this story. They literally shipped him a FedEx box of cashier's checks from $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 denominations, because if you buy a home in Georgia on the courthouse steps, you pay at that moment. So the idea was, here's like $20 million, go buy as many houses as you can. And, we figured it out, and, it wasn't without its challenges. There was literally, sort of quite, card tables we rolled in, just loose chairs that we could find in offices, closets, wherever we could stick people. And, what that taught Mark and I at the time, and I was sort of focused on, at that moment, Mark Spain real estate, like the residential component. He was over here focused on the investor side. We divided up and just sort of split our focus. Yeah. But it was this idea, man, like sometimes I think we're too like precious with our business planning. We're like, spending so much time building the plan instead of just getting out there and doing the work and executing, right? And so that good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. That was something we really learned there during that experience. But fortunately, we had the foresight to know that it would end. At some point, the gravy train would slow, and Invitation Homes would solve their, sort of initiative and buy the houses they wanted to buy and then taper back. So at that moment, we decided to go really into the residential side, and we increased. I mentioned billboards earlier. We added radio and television and just went all in. And fast forward a few more years, we had scaled from Atlanta to all over the Southeast in multiple states, Florida, the Carolinas, Tennessee, and Texas. And that led to that private equity exit that you mentioned there. So, for us, that was something we had always talked about from the beginning. And I think another lesson I learned is, when you have a very clear vision, was just knowing when it's time to kind of make that decision and having that clear vision. And it came together, and it was interesting. We started right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic disrupted everything. But, thankfully, as you probably remember, in the States, especially in the red states, things just started kind of like getting back to normal a lot faster than people anticipated. And then real estate just had an explosive few years. And so right around that time is when we sold. And so, candidly, I'm a little happy I'm no longer in residential real estate. It's very challenging right now with the rates, and inventory challenges, et cetera. But, still love that business, still a big fan of what they're doing, have a little equity in it, and they're doing great. And, it was time for me to move on. Sam, I don't know about you, but what I've learned about myself is I love building things. Like I like
Yeah.
growing, problem solving. And so, it was time for that new opportunity. And that's where Ferris Capital Partners came in.
You can tell a true entrepreneur because they're creators, right? We create, and what we create are answers to problems
Yeah.
that we find around ourselves. And really, good entrepreneurs go out and find problems and then solve them, and that's what it's all about. So you finish up, you have this crazy exit, nine-figure exit, which is just astounding in the single family world for sure.
Yes.
You can do that in multifamily, like that's nine and 10 figures. It's not, I mean, that happens every year,
Right.
but
That's right.
not residential. That's in just, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that the multiple we got was unprecedented. And part of that though is exactly what you said. Like we went out into the marketplace and we realized there was a challenge, there was a problem, and we just, were relentless in trying to solve that problem. And in residential real estate, you see it today because the team model is actually where the market share is going. And so even companies like Compass that aren't necessarily structured like a team are providing a lot of the services and things that a team does and holding their agents to a high standard. So I think that it's really interesting to me when you look at residential, because, here we are on the disruptive capitalist. There's been so many forces trying to disrupt that business and to pull the agent out. But if you look, more people are using agents today than they did, 10, 15 years ago. And so I actually love residential real estate. I kind of mentioned at the top at first, I was like, oh, there's a reputation thing here.
Yeah.
But, that opportunity to help people in a very meaningful way is exciting. And that's why I really love, the apartment syndication business that I'm in today with Ferris Capital Partners, because my business partner, Mark Ferris, and I, he was also got his start in residential real estate. And that's how we originally met. It's all about the resident for us, which may seem different than some other groups. But when we set about taking over an asset, we really think a lot about how do we improve the resident's life, the service we're providing. It's the idea when I see bad reviews on a deal we're circling, I'm like, yes, I don't want to
Yeah.
see 4.5 stars. I want to see 2 stars, three
Yeah.
stars.
Yeah.
Well, it just tells us you can go in and you can solve those problems pretty
Yeah.
easily. Better PM in there, a better leasing manager, and just hold them highly accountable. And so that kind of approach there, and I think it's interesting, but client experience in certain industries is disruptive in a sense, right? Because not everybody's focused on it. Not everybody's doing those things. So it's something we think a lot about.
I love that. Like it really is the experience that is disruptive. There's a reason why people buy Rolls Royces, right?
That's right.
It's not because they can be seen driving a Rolls Royce. It's because of the experience that they get from the dealership, from this was handcrafted for you. This was, like that experience is second to none. It's
Yeah,
like, why do you fly in a private jet versus a regular? You're just going to get there. Well, the experience is so much better
that's right.
that way. That's a disruptive experience. And so if you bring, that service component to which syndications aren't always great experiences for a lot of people.
That's right. No, you're right. And the investors obviously are top of mind as well. I mentioned the residents because for us it's the Costco philosophy. We try to hire really great people. They in turn will take really great care of the residents. And then the residents look after the returns, right? Because if they're
Right.
happy, they're going to pay that rental increase, they're going to stay in the property longer. And that thing you mentioned there around that, kind of that thing, I think to add to that, it's like, how does it make you feel, right? And that's what people are
Mhm.
looking for. They're looking for something that makes them feel good. So driving that Rolls Royce off the lot, that's just going through that incredible experience through the process of buying it, and just how does that make you feel? And so we think a lot about that. And this is not a charity, right? I mean, if you're behind on your rent, you're behind on your rent, but there's a way you can approach those situations where you have empathy for the person and you try to create solutions. And then ultimately, it's just not the right fit. We've had situations recently where we've helped the person identify maybe a property that was more affordable and a better fit for them. They were a nice person, but it just was a constant struggle to get them to pay their rent on time. And so how can we help that person find better accommodations that are
Mhm.
more, sort of meeting their needs? And so, I sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I get a sense people think we're over here just like, kumbaya around the campfire. And we are heavily metric driven. I mean, we spend a lot of time focused on results. But speaking to investors, right? I mean, you mentioned it. How many investors are in these syndication deals and they're not getting any communication? Something may go wrong. They find out about it, a year and a half later when their cash distributions cut off. And they're like, wait, what happened? I thought things were going well. And so committing to monthly communication with our investors, we send out a monthly report with financials, market update, good news, threats, bad news. I mean, we don't hide. And our investors have really responded well to that. And we're on our fourth transaction. We're submitting an LOI actually this week on a fifth. And we have investors in all four of those deals. And so for a newer fund, we think that speaks to, that level of service and that experience that we're providing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's just fantastic. So you guys are syndicating now, you're doing apartment complexes. Where are you buying?
Yeah, so we focus on, I say the Southeast, but really three key markets. So Tampa, Florida,
Hmm.
Charleston, South Carolina, and I say Atlanta, Georgia, but we really put our focus on the northern suburbs. So outside the city of Atlanta, so places like Alpharetta, Peachtree Corners, just these high growth, high income suburban markets. And then Charleston, man, it's just one of my favorite cities, high population growth. So we just look for markets that have strong economic drivers, economic diversity, population growth, and a rent to income ratio that is affordable, right? So we don't want to go into a market and be the most expensive apartment in the, area, right? We want to come in. And so our philosophy is like, if we can find a really great like C or B minus asset in an A location and then turn it into a B, really focusing on the amenities and the service, and then obviously really great unit turns. What we found, at least on our first few transactions, is that we're actually outperforming our pro forma and we're bumping up, $100, $200 less than the brand new class A, but it's still at a discount, right? And so I think our view is, as right now, as we're in some sort of economic turmoil with these tariff talks and things like that, which I think will settle down. But the point is, if we have a recession, which we all know will come at some point, it's just a question of when, right?
Right.
And Sam, I've learned like nobody has a crystal ball. It's like in the final analysis, we look back and we find the one person that maybe guessed right, and we say, "See, all the signs were there." But
Yeah, yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like I've been hearing about a recession for 4 years at this point. It feels like, right? So when it comes, which we know it will, that those B class assets with great renovation packages, I think will become a natural choice for people looking to save a little bit of money and maybe taking a step back from the class A, but then providing something of really value to the middle class, which as right now we have a major housing crisis in the United States.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
and it's kind of talked about, but I don't think people really truly understand the depth of the challenges. And cost of materials for a single family home have gone up 40+% since 2019. And so what does that look like? It looks like Americans are going to start living like Europeans pretty soon, in smaller square footage, dense housing. And that's okay. That's just a shift in culture, but nobody seems to be addressing it yet. And so at what point does it become, beyond a crisis into like a major emergency? And so that's where we feel that investing in housing, it's a core human need. That demand will never go away. And so as long as you buy in markets that, have that economic diversity, that's really the main thing we look for. We don't want to invest in a market where there's like one sector of employment that dominates. So heavily tourist markets, for example, are markets we would avoid for that reason. It's why we like Tampa in Florida versus, say, maybe even in Orlando, just because, the tourism factor. Plus, you're butting up against the ocean in Charleston and Tampa, so that slows
yeah,
growth, right? So we like that. Atlanta, I would say, is a very, sprawling market, but that's why we like those northern suburbs. They're the markets that are most developed, so they're kind of infill markets, and many of them have multi-family moratoriums or make it very difficult to build new multifamily. So those are the factors we're looking for in the markets we invest in.
yeah. The geographic um, area up there, northern Atlanta. You're getting into the whatever mountains and the
Yeah,
rivers and
yeah,
so forth. Yeah,
yeah,
great
that's right.
places.
Yeah, yeah. I've lived in Atlanta most of my life, and so I'm partial to it, but it's probably just what I'm used to. But major employers, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies headquartered here, good population growth, and yeah, it's a market I'm highly familiar with. So, man, I just love the idea when we find a deal, I can get in the car and go look at it that day.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
having that intimate market knowledge is super critical. Of course, Mark's in Florida, so he has Tampa well covered, and Charleston, we don't have team members there, but I probably go twice a year just to visit. My 16-year-old daughter's got College of Charleston on her mind. Now that's frankly because it's near the beach, but that's okay. I get it. I
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
get the same way. But anyway, but yeah, no, it's been fun, and I think for me that opportunity to take a step back and sort of go, okay, 15 years building a business and you pay all the stupid tax along the way, just the things you don't know and the mistakes you make and, candidly, the bad hires you made, and taking all those lessons and sort of applying it here. I was listening to one of your podcasts that released recently, and the person was talking about he's learned more from the failures, right, than the successes, and I think that's so true. And I think back to Mark Spain real estate, and the times I remember most fondly were the most challenging times. Maybe not in the moment, but in the final analysis, you look back and you're like, man, that's when we really took that leap forward, or we solved a big problem. And that's what life's about in my mind, right? Overcoming challenges, and finding a way through. And you mentioned that entrepreneur component, the creativity. I'm a big believer in doing something creative every day, and that could be in the business. It could be, I make music, so my son and I making a song together, writing a letter to my wife or whatever. Just anything you can do on a daily basis, just to exercise a little creativity, I think is super important.
That is crazy important. So you create music. You're a drummer, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the story was I wanted a guitar in middle school, and I mean, I'm sorry, I wanted drums in middle school, and my parents went to the music store and said, "You don't want to have drums in your house. Trust me, buy them a guitar." And so I kind of learned that, but as soon as I got some of my own money in college bartending, I bought a drum set. So
Yeah.
my older son, he's 20, he's in audio engineering up at Belmont in Nashville. So he's way more talented than me, and he's got a band in Atlanta that they get a few
Oh,
hundred
wow.
people showing up at their shows. So that is probably the coolest thing that's happened to me recently, is now him and I can make music together. And then I've got a little 10-year-old who's basically a prodigy on drums. Sometimes when I hear him, I'm like, oh, I didn't know Jackson, that's my older, was in town. And I go down and it's my 10-year-old. I'm like, holy mackerel. So we're a big musical family. For me, music is one of these things where, if you actually look at the science of it, like listening to music releases like serotonin, right? It's like a feel
Yeah.
good chemical, right? And so, yeah, just when I'm working, if I'm not on a Zoom call, the music is blaring in here, usually instrumental so I can stay focused, but just I'm a big music guy.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
So real drum set or electronic drum set?
Real all day. Yeah, real
Yeah,
drums. I actually have
totally different.
two and about to buy a third, so it does become a bit of an addiction. So you got to be a little careful. But yeah, real. Digital would probably make sense given the fact that I have a wife, and we're all trying to kind of sometimes deal with the house being so loud. But I love it when my sons, sometimes they play together, and it's like that noise is the coolest noise I can imagine, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me. But yeah, I can imagine some people would probably have a different view on that. But yeah, man, I think, it's interesting timing right now. There's been some talk recently because of an interview given by Elon Musk, and, he referenced like empathy as being sort of a problem. And I'm not trying to get political here, but I think the idea of empathy being a problem is something that's so almost fascinating to me, because I think largely my success in business has been driven by really a focused effort to build my empathy, because it doesn't naturally come to me. And we were talking before we started recording about reading, and that's what I really get from reading, right? It's building empathy, but learning about people's experiences that are vastly different from my own. And so when I look back at our success at Mark Spain Real Estate, the moment we really saw that meteoric growth in our sales numbers is when we really said, it's all about the people, and we just got to hire the right people. And, Mark coming to me and saying, basically, and he oversaw marketing. So he's like, I got to go find the most talented marketing person in the world. Like, your job is to go find the most talented sales team in the world. And we spent so much time and effort on that. When you build that team and they have alignment with your values, not just your sort of values that are on the wall in your office, but like your personal values, like what's important to you and what you want to accomplish, and you lock arms together, man, it's in that team approach that so much greatness can happen. Having empathy for our clients that are going through a very stressful situation on the apartment side, people that are struggling to make ends meet, dual income families, et cetera, and having empathy for their situation. To me, it's one of the secret weapons, I think, of a disruptive capitalist, right?
Yeah.
Once again, knowing when you say we're running a business here and we have to put the mission of the business first, nobody lives above the mission. And that includes myself and Mark, right? My business partner. So when you have that kind of mindset and mentality, it's still about the mission, but we can do it in a way where everybody's taken care of. That's when we saw that massive growth at Mark Spain Real Estate. And I think what's led to our early success at Ferris Capital Partners.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Coming in with that skill set, that knowledge, and then that understanding that it's really about the client experience. And for a syndicator, you have two clients, right? You have investors who are your clients, and then you have your residents, your
Right.
clients. And so, at both ends, you're working on that resident experience. They have to have a
That's
great
right.
experience at the property because they're the ones who actually pay the bills, and they're the ones, like you said before, that's
Yeah.
where the money comes from.
That's it. That's
Not the
right. The
building,
customer.
the
Yeah.
people in the
That's it.
building.
That's right,
And
man.
yeah. So you guys raising for a project right now?
Well, we just put an LOI out on a deal. We put one out last week, but it just in the highest and best, we decided to tap out. It just we were at where we were comfortable.
Hmm.
Deal flow right now is limited, and you still have a lot of operators that are struggling, right? And that's bad for them. It's bad for the market, right? And so we're seeing the lenders work with those owners and operators and helping them kind of navigate. But you're still seeing a lot of aspirational pricing, I guess I'll say it that way, from some of these owners. But this year it started to shift, at least in our mind. We started to see a little bit more quality stuff come out that kind of fits our model. And we're very particular. We only like 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, true value add. So we really stay close to the markets I mentioned and to that strategy. So no opportunistic, no core, just do one thing really well. I'd say that's another key lesson I've learned is that go small to go big. It's something I learned from Gary Keller, who started Keller Williams. Like just do one thing really, really great. And so for us, that's value add, apartment buildings. So no self storage, right? No car washes, just value add apartment buildings. So yeah, deal flow's picked up. So we actually have a couple we're looking at in Tampa as well, but this one in Atlanta we put out today is the one we're really excited for. So yeah, keeping our fingers crossed. We win that one hopefully. So we'll be in an active capital raise hopefully by the time this episode comes out. We'll see though.
Yeah, awesome. So
Yeah.
speaking of that timing, then if somebody's thinking like I would really like to invest with somebody who is in those markets, Atlanta, Tampa, and Charleston, and they want to have a great experience, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is ferriscapitalpartners.com. That's FARIS. You can register for a deal alert. We also have a way you can just book in a time if you wanted to connect with Mark or myself. We're always available. You can also find me on LinkedIn, John Makarewicz. I'm sure you'll have that in
I'll
the
make sure
notes
that's in the
there.
show
Something,
notes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We're not going to make anybody spell my insane last name, right? But find me on LinkedIn. That's usually, the best way outside of ferriscapitalpartners.com. My email is john@ferriscapitalpartners.com. So you can shoot me an email as well.
John. Thank
That's
you,
right.
John. I appreciate that, man. I've really enjoyed our show. I hope everyone else has too. And I love that you're looking at the world in the with empathy and with service in mind. And that's really like that's the disruptor, right? We have
Yeah,
generations before us who got so focused on the numbers that people stopped mattering. And that's how you can justify war, you can justify all sorts of things. But when
that's
people
right.
matter, it's different, right?
That's
You
right.
can be a capitalist with people versus against people. Cool.
That's
So
it.
thank you